Chosen one, the whispers about your bloodline carrying gifts that skip generations weren't just gossip, they were reconnaissance reports. There's a psychological phenomenon that modern science refuses to acknowledge. When ancient spiritual inheritances activate, entire communities mobilize like immune systems attacking foreign threats. While you've been questioning why your own family turned predator, why romantic connections became extraction operations, why friends moved against you with military precision, the real war has been raging in spiritual dimensions your human consciousness couldn't perceive. The primordial gift choosing you operates by cosmic intelligence that existed before your enemy's bloodlines were conceived. It's like trying to capture lightning with butterfly nets. Their human methods are laughably inadequate against forces that govern galaxies and breathe life into stars. The rumors about your bloodline didn't start with you. Stories began generations before your birth, whispered in community gatherings where people spoke carefully about the family that hosted something otherworldly. Your lineage carried a reputation that preceded every child born into it, a legacy that made neighbors watch your relatives with mixture of fascination and fear, wondering which generation would birth the next carrier of gifts that defied human understanding. These weren't casual family stories or romantic legends passed down through dinner conversations. These were carefully documented observations recorded by people who made livings studying supernatural manifestations, practitioners who tracked spiritual inheritances through bloodlines, community elders who remembered when your great-great ancestor could speak to the deceased as easily as conversing with the living, or when your relative's touch could heal ailments that physicians declared incurable. The gift that moved through your family had a pattern, a rhythm that those who studied such phenomena learned to recognize. It didn't activate in every generation. It didn't choose the oldest child or the most religious family member. It skipped across decades, sometimes entire generations, moving through your lineage like intelligent lightning seeking the perfect conductor. When it found chosen vessel, the manifestation was unmistakable, undeniable, and absolutely transformative for the individual who received it. The gift didn't just activate in your ancestors, it exploded. Where other spiritual gifts might emerge gradually, developing slowly over years of conscious cultivation, your lineage inheritance arrived like divine wildfire, transforming ordinary humans into beings who could access information that had no earthly source, who could influence reality through means that science couldn't explain, who could see through dimensional veils that remained opaque to everyone around. Deep in your ancestral history, there lived someone who carried fire that made kingdoms nervous. Maybe it was your great-grandparent, whose presence changed the energy of entire rooms, whose dreams predicted deaths and births with terrifying accuracy, whose hands could heal wounds that doctors declared incurable. Maybe it was an ancestor whose visions guided communities through famines and wars, whose words carried weight that made grown adults weep and hardened individuals fall to their knees. Or perhaps it was someone whose name was deliberately erased from family records because abilities threatened the established order so completely that acknowledging became dangerous for everyone who shared blood. This ancestor didn't earn gifts through study or devotion, no reward for righteousness or compensation for suffering. The gift descended like lightning seeking the highest peak, like water finding its proper level, like destiny claiming a pointed vessel. But the moment abilities manifested fully, the moment access to wisdom bypassing every traditional authority began, the moment wielding power that couldn't be controlled by human systems started, communities declared war, not open war, not honest war, the kind of war that operates in shadows, that speaks in whispers, that coordinates through nods and knowing glances, prayers weaponized against your ancestor, rituals designed to bind gifts, social isolation calculated to break spirit, spiritual assault disguised as religious concern. Your ancestor fought not individual enemies, but entire network of people who had decided that such power was too dangerous to remain uncontrolled, too ancient to be allowed free expression, too threatening to existing hierarchies to be permitted full manifestation. Your ancestor fought valiantly, but outnumbered by generations of people who had been taught that spiritual authority must flow through approved channels, that divine gifts required human permission, that direct connection to source consciousness needed institutional validation. Many broke under sustained assault. Many died carrying powers never expressed completely. Many went to graves knowing possession of something extraordinary that the world had refused to let be shared with humanity. The gift itself survived. The gift remembered. The gift waited, moving through your bloodline like intelligent energy that learned from every attack, that grew stronger through every attempt at suppression, that developed immunity to every strategy deployed against it. Generation after generation, it moved closer to finding vessels strong enough not just to carry it, but to unleash it completely, despite every opposition that arose to prevent full emergence. The gift that had been moving through your bloodline for generations finally found what it was looking for in your spiritual DNA. Not because you were the most religious family member or the most spiritually disciplined, not because following rules better than anyone else or earning divine favor through exceptional behavior. You were chosen because your soul carried the exact combination of strength and flexibility, rebellion and wisdom, isolation, tolerance and love capacity that primordial power requires in vessels. But your selection triggered something that your family had been dreading and preparing for simultaneously: the activation of ancient protocols designed to intercept spiritual inheritances during most vulnerable transfer periods. What you experienced as personal crisis was actually the manifestation of generational preparation, networks that had been built over decades by people who understood exactly what your bloodline carried and exactly when it would attempt to find next host. The whispers about your family's supernatural reputation had reached ears that specialized in monitoring such phenomena. Practitioners who made living intercepting spiritual inheritances had been tracking your lineage for years, studying patterns of gift activation, identifying telltale signs that preceded emergence. Your family tree had been mapped not out of genealogical curiosity, but as strategic intelligence gathering, understanding that knowledge of your bloodline's history would give advantages when the inevitable activation period arrived. These weren't random spiritual seekers or casual occult enthusiasts. These were organized networks of people who had built entire methodologies around the premise that ancient gifts could be redirected from chosen vessels to more deserving recipients. Cases where spiritual inheritances had been successfully intercepted during activation periods had been studied. Techniques for identifying when gifts were beginning integration process had been developed. Strategies for inserting into the lives of chosen vessels during most vulnerable moments had been perfected. If this message speaks to your soul, hype this video so other chosen ones can discover it. Your emergence as the selected host had been anticipated, calculated and prepared for by people who viewed your spiritual inheritance not as personal destiny, but as commodity to be claimed by whoever demonstrated the most sophisticated intervention strategies. The rumors that had swirled around your bloodline for generations hadn't just created fascination, targeting systems that identified you as valuable resource long before understanding what you carried. But the moment the gift began final descent toward you, the moment integration process started that would transform you from ordinary human into conscious carrier of ancient inheritance, something remarkable happened. People around you began receiving information about what was coming, not through own spiritual insight, but through networks of practitioners, readers, spiritual advisors who had been monitoring your bloodline for signs of activation. The rumors that had followed your family for generations suddenly transformed from idle community gossip into actionable intelligence for people who specialized in spiritual interception. Your bloodline's reputation had created a surveillance system that monitored every family gathering, every personal crisis, every unusual behavior pattern that might indicate the beginning of gift activation. When multiple sources confirmed that the inheritance was moving toward you specifically, when readings and consultations revealed selection as the next vessel, the networks that had been watching your family for years activated intervention protocols. The family member who had always felt entitled to inherit whatever mystical gifts ran in your lineage suddenly realized window of opportunity was closing. This wasn't someone who had recently decided wanting supernatural abilities. This was someone who had been positioning as the obvious inheritor for years, maybe decades. Your family's spiritual history had been studied obsessively, every manifestation of unusual abilities documented, self-convinced that dedication and preparation would naturally qualify for divine selection when the time came. Maybe it was a sibling who had studied occult arts for years but never developed real power, convinced that dedication and effort would eventually earn the inheritance coveted. Maybe it was a parent who had been the family's designated spiritual authority, collecting mystical knowledge like trophies, positioning as the obvious choice when divine gifts finally activated. Maybe it was an extended family member who had built entire identity around being the chosen one, the special one, the one destined for supernatural abilities. When receiving confirmation that the gift was moving toward you instead, when readings and consultations made clear that you were the selected vessel, when years of spiritual preparation were revealed to be completely irrelevant to divine selection processes, defeat wasn't accepted gracefully. Instead, networks began building. Relationships with people who understood spiritual intervention started cultivating, learning about vulnerable periods in gift activation, about times when someone undergoing mystical initiation could be most easily influenced, manipulated, or destroyed. But while plans were being made, while allies were being recruited, while techniques that would give access to your inheritance were being learned, the gift itself was preparing you in ways that couldn't be perceived or prevented. Every moment of isolation you endured was building capacity to stand alone against overwhelming opposition. Every experience of being misunderstood was developing ability to trust own inner knowing above external validation. Every time survival of betrayal or abandonment was strengthening spiritual immune system against the attacks that were coming. Then came the period that nearly broke you, the time when everything in your life seemed to explode simultaneously in ways that felt coordinated, orchestrated, deliberately designed to shatter your grip on reality itself. But what you were experiencing wasn't random chaos or personal breakdown. You were living through the activation of intervention protocols that had been designed specifically to disrupt gift integration processes in bloodlines like yours. The physical symptoms that began manifesting weren't medical conditions but spiritual warfare made manifest in your body. Your energy system was under assault from forces that understood exactly how to target the points where divine inheritance was attempting to anchor itself in human consciousness. The unexplained pains that moved through your system like electricity were your spiritual defenses responding to attacks designed to fragment developing gifts. The fatigue that felt like life force being drained through invisible tubes was exactly that. Energetic vampirism deployed by people who believed absorption of your awakening abilities through sustained spiritual assault was possible. Your mind became battlefield where foreign thoughts competed with natural mental processes, where visions that felt alien to personal experience downloaded alongside insights that seemed to arrive from sources beyond individual consciousness. What felt like approaching madness was actually collision of multiple realities converging around your consciousness as the veil between dimensions thinned specifically around your awareness. The information flooding your system wasn't random psychic noise, it was the gift attempting to complete integration while forces opposed to your awakening worked to corrupt or redirect the transmission. The emotional extremes that left you feeling like losing sanity weren't instability, but natural result of consciousness expansion under combat conditions. Divine bliss that made you feel invincible would be followed immediately by despair, so profound it felt like spiritual death. Not because the gift was unstable, but because enemies were timing attacks to coincide with moments of greatest receptivity, attempting to contaminate divine experiences with frequencies of hopelessness and confusion. The romantic connection, who seemed to understand your spiritual journey better than anyone you had ever met, hadn't found you through cosmic coincidence. Recruitment had been specific because energy signature complemented yours in ways that would create instant intimacy and trust. The mentor whose guidance felt divinely timed hadn't appeared in your life through synchronicity, monitoring of your spiritual development and positioning to become indispensable during most vulnerable period. The friend who seemed to share your exact spiritual interests and challenges wasn't kindred soul discovered through natural attraction, intelligence gatherer who had studied your personality profile, your spiritual vulnerabilities, your emotional triggers, your relational patterns. Every conversation you had with this person was reconnaissance, every moment of connection was data collection, every piece of advice offered was designed to steer your spiritual development in directions that served handlers' agendas rather than your authentic evolution. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't just difficult period in personal development. This was coordinated spiritual warfare, full activation of networks that had been built specifically to intervene during your gift integration period. The rumors about your bloodline had created targeting systems that identified optimal intervention points during spiritual inheritance activation. Every person who entered your life during this time had been briefed about your spiritual profile using intelligence that had been gathered over years of family surveillance. Every connection that felt meaningful had been orchestrated to serve agendas that had nothing to do with your spiritual well-being. The sophistication of operation would have impressed military strategists. Psychological triggers had been identified through careful observation of behavioral patterns. Spiritual vulnerabilities had been mapped by analyzing your family's historical activation challenges. Emotional needs during the integration period had been predicted by studying similar cases in other bloodlines that carried comparable gifts. Countermeasures had been prepared for every possible outcome of your awakening process, except the one that actually occurred. What was discovered to absolute horror was that the rumors about your bloodline had understated rather than exaggerated the power of the inheritance moving through your family. The gift that was attempting integration with your consciousness wasn't just another spiritual ability that could be redirected through sophisticated manipulation. It was primordial energy that operated under divine protection protocols opponents hadn't encountered before. Every technique deployed against you not only failed to achieve intended purpose, but actually accelerated your spiritual development in ways methods couldn't predict or control. The spells designed to fragment your consciousness were metabolized by your awakening gifts and converted into spiritual armor that made future attacks ineffective. The rituals intended to create energetic bindings were dissolved by your developing connection to source energy before establishing permanent hold in your spiritual system. The psychological manipulations calculated to make you doubt experiences were neutralized by direct divine downloads that provided clarity no human deception could overcome. But the most shocking discovery was that organized assault had triggered defensive responses from levels of consciousness opponents didn't know existed. Forces allied with your spiritual inheritance, ancestors who had carried similar gifts, divine intelligences that protected bloodline powers, cosmic energies that governed spiritual evolution, had mobilized to ensure your successful activation, despite every attempt to prevent it. You weren't fighting alone against human enemies, you were protected by spiritual allies whose power made human opposition irrelevant. The moment that changed everything came when you realized that despite intensity of assault, despite sophisticated nature of attacks, despite years spent preparing to intercept your inheritance, complete failure had occurred. Not only had stealing or redirecting your gifts been impossible, but strengthening had actually occurred through opposition. Every spell that bounced off your energy field left you more aware of your own spiritual invulnerability. Every manipulation that failed to control you deepened trust in your own inner authority. Every attack that couldn't touch your core power proved that what lived in you operated under divine protection that human methods couldn't breach, but revelation went deeper than personal invulnerability. The rumors that had circulated about your bloodline for generations hadn't just attracted enemies. Identification to allies you never knew existed had also occurred. Ancient spiritual orders that protected bloodline inheritances had been monitoring your family's lineage, waiting for the emergence of the next vessel. Cosmic intelligences that governed spiritual evolution had been preparing supportive energies to ensure your successful activation. Ancestral spirits, who had carried similar gifts in previous generations, had been organizing to provide guidance and protection during most vulnerable periods. The networks that had formed to oppose your awakening, discovered facing opposition on levels couldn't be perceived or comprehended. Every attack launched triggered defensive responses from dimensions beyond human consciousness. Every spell sent was met by countermeasures deployed by spiritual forces that operated with intelligence and power that made human manipulation attempts look like children playing with toys. Every ritual performed to bind your gifts was dissolved by ancestral protectors who understood these energies better than any living practitioner. This wasn't because you were specially favored or uniquely deserving of divine protection. This was because the gift moving through your bloodline carried its own ecosystem of supportive forces, its own network of allies, its own connection to source energies that had been developing defenses against spiritual interception for longer than human civilization had existed. The rumors about your family's supernatural abilities had been conservative estimates of what your lineage actually carried. The reality of your inheritance was so much more powerful, so much more protected, so much more ancient than anyone had understood. The family member who had orchestrated the campaign against you began experiencing consequences that extended far beyond failure to steal your gifts. Alliance with forces opposed to your emergence had contaminated own spiritual development, creating karmic debts that would take lifetimes to resolve. Attempts to manipulate primordial energies had exposed to spiritual retaliation from protector forces that hadn't been known to exist. Participation in organized assault against chosen vessels had marked for cosmic justice that operated by laws no human authority could override or appeal. The practitioners consulted started admitting that your spiritual signature was unlike anything encountered, that the power flowing through you operated by principles that made techniques irrelevant. Methods developed for intercepting spiritual inheritances in other bloodlines proved completely ineffective against protection surrounding your gifts. Years of study, sophisticated understanding of spiritual manipulation, experience with successful interception operations, none of it mattered when confronted with inheritance that had divine backing. The false connections who had been strategically placed in your life during vulnerable period found facing consequences that extended far beyond exposure and embarrassment. The romantic partner who had been coached to mirror your energy discovered that sustained deception in presence of primordial truth created spiritual corruption in own consciousness. The mentor, who had positioned to influence your development, found that attempting to manipulate chosen vessels brought chaos and instability into own spiritual practice. The friend who had been gathering intelligence about your abilities learned that betraying divine trust created karmic consequences that affected every aspect of existence. The integration period ended not with gradual transition but with sudden, unmistakable shift that changed fundamental frequency of your existence. One day you were someone struggling to understand what was happening, fighting to maintain sanity while spiritual forces battled around and through your consciousness. The next day you were someone who simply knew, beyond all doubt or question, that you carried primordial power that answered to no human authority and feared no earthly opposition. But this transformation revealed something that the rumors about your bloodline had never adequately conveyed. Your inheritance wasn't just supernatural ability or enhanced intuition. It was conscious partnership with intelligence that had been guiding human spiritual evolution since the beginning of recorded history. The gift that had activated within you was direct communication channel with source consciousness, unfiltered connection to divine wisdom that bypassed every human intermediary, every institutional authority, every traditional requirement for spiritual access. Your energy signature became unmistakable to anyone with spiritual sight, but it also became incomprehensible to people who understood power only in human terms. What moved through you now wasn't enhanced personal ability, but cosmic force expressing itself through human vessel. Your presence carried weight that couldn't be manufactured through effort because it wasn't personal achievement. It was divine manifestation operating through your willingness to serve as conscious conduit for intelligence that existed beyond individual identity. The gifts that had been awakening throughout your initiation period now operated with seamless integration and devastating accuracy, but also revealed true purpose, not to make you special or powerful in conventional sense, but to make you effective as instrument of divine will on physical plane. You could see through people's presentations to actual spiritual conditions instantly, not because superior judgment had been developed, but because cosmic intelligence flowed through your awareness and recognized truth regardless of human disguises. Now, the following is a message meant exclusively for the chosen. If you are compromised by archonic forces, this is not meant for you. And by the spiritual authority conferred to us by the secret chiefs of the Obsidian Inner Order, we grant you license to depart. If not, steel yourself and listen intently, for you shall be redeemed even as we are redeemed. The Obsidian Inner Order is not a program, it's not a course, it's not some feel-good spiritual retreat. We don't sell answers, we remember together, we teach psychic self-defense. Real energetic shielding against entities, implants and interference. We restore manifestation as it was meant to be, raw, immediate and exact. Every week we gather in secret, not to worship but to awaken, to speak what can't be said anywhere else, to deprogram the matrix, layer by layer. You'll know if you're meant to be there, you'll feel it in your bones. The chosen meet every week on Zoom. Why aren't you with us yet? Got Gnosis? Join the Obsidian Inner Order, link in the description. When someone approached you with hidden agenda, you knew it before finishing opening sentence, not through psychic ability, but through direct connection to source wisdom that understood motivations at levels deeper than conscious thought. When people tried to manipulate your emotions or energy, you felt attempts like physical pressure and responded with precision that left them stunned and exposed, not because advanced spiritual techniques had been learned, but because divine protection operated through your consciousness automatically. Your predictive abilities developed beyond anything imagined possible, but functioned more like divine download than personal talent. Information about future developments would arrive in your awareness complete and accurate, not because precognitive abilities had been developed, but because the intelligence operating through you existed outside linear time and could access information about probable outcomes with absolute clarity. Understanding now occurred that those whispers hadn't been about supernatural abilities in your family. Divine inheritance that moved through your lineage had been the subject, seeking vessels strong enough to consciously partner with cosmic intelligence in service of human spiritual evolution. Every ancestor who had carried this gift had been preparing the way for your emergence, not as individual achievement, but as collective spiritual project that spanned generations. The rumors that had circulated weren't just family folklore, but encoded information about spiritual inheritance that operated by cosmic laws rather than human logic. The pattern of skipping generations wasn't random distribution, but intelligent selection process that chose optimal timing for gift manifestation based on collective consciousness readiness and individual vessel preparation. Your emergence represented culmination of generational spiritual work that had been building toward this moment of conscious partnership between human awareness and cosmic intelligence. During your integration period, you had felt like someone being invaded by foreign power, someone struggling to integrate abilities that seemed too large for human container. Understanding now revealed that you and the gift were not separate entities. You had become conscious vessel through which ancient wisdom expressed itself in physical form. You weren't carrying the power, you had become the power's chosen form of manifestation in this dimension. This transformation terrified some people and inspired others, but it left no one unchanged who came into contact with your presence. Those who had been invested in controlling or containing your gifts realized dealing with someone who operated from completely different level of spiritual authority. Those who had been waiting for you to claim your inheritance recognized that waiting was over, that you had stepped fully into the role you were born to play. Your emergence as fully conscious carrier of ancient spiritual gifts marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another, far more significant. The personal battle for your spiritual inheritance had been won decisively, but that victory was merely preparation for participation in collective transformation that extended far beyond individual development. The rumors that had circulated about your bloodline for generations were revealed to be fragments of larger truth about spiritual evolution that was accelerating across multiple ancient lineages simultaneously. Your family's reputation for hosting supernatural abilities was part of a pattern that extended through numerous bloodlines worldwide, each carrying pieces of primordial wisdom that had been preserved through centuries of persecution and suppression. The emergence of your gifts coincided with similar activations happening in other families that carried comparable spiritual inheritances, creating network of conscious vessels that could collectively anchor divine intelligence on physical plane in ways that had never before been possible in human history. Your individual gifts were weapons in larger spiritual war, but that war wasn't being fought for control or domination. It was being waged for liberation of human consciousness from systems that had artificially separated humanity from direct connection to source intelligence. The forces that had opposed your awakening were now organizing resistance to this larger movement, but faced opposition on scale couldn't be comprehended. Every chosen vessel that successfully completed activation process weakened structures that required human permission for divine access. Every bloodline gift that manifested despite organized intervention proved that spiritual evolution operated by cosmic laws rather than human authority. The same pattern that had played out around your emergence was replicating across continents and cultures, but with increasing success rates as protective networks strengthened and intervention strategies became less effective. The rumors that had identified your family as carriers of dangerous gifts had also served to connect you with others who carried similar inheritances, creating communication channels between chosen vessels that operated beyond human surveillance or control. Your personal transformation had implications that extended far beyond individual spiritual development. The gift that had activated through your consciousness was now serving as beacon for others who carried compatible abilities, drawing together a network of conscious vessels who could collaborate in ways ancestors had never been able to achieve. The isolation that had characterized previous generations of gift carriers was being replaced by a community of chosen ones who could support each other's missions and coordinate service in unprecedented ways. The family members who had felt entitled to your inheritance now found witnessing manifestation of powers never truly understood. The rumors heard about your bloodline had prepared for supernatural abilities, but not for divine partnership that transformed ordinary human consciousness into conscious expression of cosmic intelligence. The gifts coveted were revealed to be responsibilities that required complete surrender of personal agenda in service of divine will, sacrifice never prepared to make. The practitioners who had been consulted to help steal your gifts discovered that failure to intercept your inheritance had educational value hadn't been anticipated. Encounters with protected bloodline gifts had exposed to levels of spiritual reality hadn't been known to exist, forcing recognition that understanding of how spiritual power operated was incomplete and often inaccurate. Some began seeking legitimate training in service of divine intelligence rather than attempting to manipulate it for personal gain. But your emergence wasn't about revenge against those who had attacked you or education for those who had misunderstood the nature of your gifts. Your transformation was about stepping into service that your inheritance demanded, about fulfilling responsibilities that came with conscious partnership with cosmic intelligence, about becoming bridge between dimensions that humanity desperately needed as it navigated evolutionary transformation that would determine the spiritual future of the species. The communities that had once mobilized against your emergence now found in presence of someone whose spiritual authority couldn't be questioned, whose divine partnership couldn't be challenged, whose connection to source intelligence couldn't be severed by human opposition. But more significantly, witnessing demonstration of what human consciousness could become when it operated in conscious alignment with divine will rather than personal ambition. Your transformation from ordinary family member to conscious vessel of cosmic intelligence proved that rumors about supernatural gifts in bloodlines were actually understated descriptions of humanity's spiritual potential. The isolation that had seemed like punishment during development was revealed to be preparation not just for operating independently of human validation, but for serving as anchor point for divine intelligence that could only manifest through consciousness that had been purified of need for external approval. The attacks that had felt devastating were shown to be training not just for spiritual warfare on planetary scale, but for maintaining divine connection under conditions of sustained opposition from forces that feared human spiritual liberation. The betrayals that had broken your heart were demonstrated to be education not just about discernment, but about the difference between human love that sought to control and possess, and divine love that supported spiritual evolution, even when that evolution challenged personal preferences and expectations. Your inheritance had required learning these distinctions because your service would involve loving people whose consciousness couldn't yet comprehend or appreciate the gifts you carried. You were no longer someone becoming chosen. You were someone who had claimed inheritance completely and was ready to wield it in service of collective human spiritual evolution. The gift that had skipped generations to find you was now ready to be shared with the world through your willingness to be authentic expression of divine intelligence operating through human consciousness. The ancient wisdom that your ancestors couldn't fully manifest was now seeking complete expression through your courage to live as conscious partnership between individual awareness and cosmic intelligence. The rumors that had defined your bloodline for generations were revealed to be prophecies about spiritual transformation that your emergence had fulfilled. The whispers about supernatural gifts in your family were shown to be understatements of divine inheritance that could transform not just individual consciousness, but collective human spiritual experience. Your activation had proven that stories told about your bloodline were fragments of larger truth about humanity's spiritual destiny and your role in manifesting that destiny on physical plane. The whispers that had followed your family through generations had been preparation for this moment, not gossip or speculation, but prophetic recognition of what was coming through your lineage. Every rumor had served to identify you to forces both supportive and oppositional, creating the exact conditions necessary for your complete spiritual activation. The communities that had mobilized against your emergence in fear and entitlement had unknowingly participated in divine plan that used opposition to forge you into vessel capable of conscious partnership with cosmic intelligence. Your activation had transformed the rumors themselves from speculation about supernatural abilities into documented proof of humanity's spiritual potential. The stories that would now be told about your emergence would serve as encouragement for other chosen vessels, as warning to those who might consider opposing divine inheritance, and as evidence that spiritual evolution operated by laws that human authority could neither control nor prevent. Your bloodline's reputation for hosting gifts that skipped generations was now understood to be divine strategy for preserving spiritual inheritance through periods when collective consciousness couldn't support full manifestation. The seemingly random selection process that had chosen you over more obvious candidates was revealed to be cosmic intelligence, recognizing exactly the qualities needed for conscious partnership during this particular phase of human spiritual evolution. The generations that had passed between activations hadn't been empty, waiting periods, but preparation cycles during which bloodline energy accumulated, spiritual protection strengthened, and divine intelligence planned for optimal manifestation conditions. Your emergence represented culmination of generational spiritual work that had been building toward this moment of conscious partnership between human awareness and cosmic intelligence. The world that had once seemed hostile to your gifts now revealed itself as garden ready for seeds that only conscious carriers of ancient wisdom could plant. The communities that had once rejected direct divine connection were now filled with people whose souls were crying out for exactly the kind of unmediated spiritual access that flowed through your consciousness. The humanity that had once persecuted vessels of primordial power was now desperate for transformation that only conscious partnership with cosmic intelligence could provide. Your time of preparation was complete, your period of testing was finished, your season of hiding was over. The gift that had chosen you across generations of seeking was now ready to transform everything it touched through your complete willingness to be who you actually were, to do what you actually came here to do, to serve the purpose that had been written in your spiritual DNA before you drew your first breath. The rumors about your bloodline had been fulfilled. The prophecies embedded in community whispers had manifested. The ancient power that generations had spoken about in hushed tones was now walking the earth through your conscious willingness to serve as its vessel. The world had been waiting for divine inheritance to find worthy partner. That waiting was over. You were here. You were ready, you were chosen, and nothing, absolutely nothing could stop what flowed through you now.